Joining us today from La Brea is Bree Buning, the Director of Marketing for Aspire Bakeries. Bree, welcome to the stage. So, Bree, in today's environment where time, labor, and inflation are really steering restaurant operations, what's your best advice for an operator to ensure success?
All right. It's been a couple of crazy years. For suppliers, operators, and really there's a couple of things I think from our perspective that will help. One is the ability to be flexible and adaptable. I think you mentioned it early on. Consumers' preferences continue to change. The light speed that social media is creating these trends needs to be felt within the food service environment. We need operators to be able to think about how that impacts their menu. Not every trend needs to play into your operations, but you need to think about who your consumers are, monitoring those consumers and the trends, and being able to put those into your operations quicker. I think you also need to feel empowered to create the menu that's core to who you are and charge what you need to charge for those menus. I think we've gotten to this, create the value menu or the chicken and fries to get people in, but consumers want to experience something different. If they're eating out of their home and their share of wallet is so constrained, they need a menu that's going to intrigue them, entice them to spend more. So you've got to think about not just the value menu, but the menu that you're creating is engaging, enticing, kind of a twist on something that they're familiar with, so that they'll kind of want to come into your operations and come back, because people are on social media and talking. They'll let you know when it wasn't good, and they'll let you know when it is.
Sure. Now, of course, we're getting ready to hear more about consumer trends from our keynote speaker. Yes. But which trends is La Brea Bakery tracking that you expect to see on restaurant menus in the coming year?
There's a lot, actually. I would say not so much seeing on menu, but the thing that we're really tracking is AI. The impact that AI has on business in the totality. With the launch of ChatGPT, we're seeing food trends come together very quickly. What used to take weeks to test a concept can now take hours. And how the tech industry is impacting the operations in the back end to create less constraints on labor. We saw yesterday with the motorized robot at the poolside chat. All of these things are really affecting businesses, and I'm interested to see how that's going to impact what we're going to see on menus next year. And then secondarily, it's the nostalgia, which has been very common over the last probably 5 years, accelerated by the pandemic. But the twist on that nostalgia. So it's not just chicken and waffles, which we are seeing across menus. It's a cornbread waffle with a spicy hot honey. So something that's familiar with a twist that gets them interested enough to try, but not so far reaching that they're not interested.
Well, that's great. Bree, thank you so much, and thank you, La Brea.
Thank you.
Okay, time for our keynote introduction. Jack Lee is co-founder and chairman of Datassential, a global food and beverage digital research powerhouse that helps the restaurant industry innovate with data. Jack is a master at connecting the dots between food data and trend research and actionable business opportunity for restaurant brands. Let's give a warm welcome to Jack Lee.
Good morning. Am I coming through okay? It is really great to be here with you. Thank you. I hope you have nice, mostly full bellies at this point, and you have energy to last the rest of the day. I think there's a great agenda that we have planned. I'm going to talk about a bunch of stuff. As Sam mentioned, we have some brand new things that we learned from consumers that we'll be sharing, and we have some brand new analysis. We've done some from pretty large data sets that I'm going to share too. But I wanted to maybe just start off with a quick, litmus test of how up to speed we all are with where the industry has gone the last few years. So I'm going to ask you a question. Let's say if we look at the total number of US restaurants, chains, independents, the actual individual locations, since, let's say, the start of the pandemic, and we'll maybe say that's like roughly March 2020, would you say that we have more restaurant locations or less restaurant locations today, like literally today? So by, vote, you can do your hand, you could yell, you could scream, whatever makes you happy. Who thinks that today, compared to March 2020, we have more restaurants? It's a little tepid, okay? Who thinks that we have fewer restaurants? You see how you can't cheer for fewer restaurants? You can just raise your hand. Let's actually see what. So I think was that almost like an even split. I think I didn't really see like a huge one way or the other type of thing. Let's see what's actually happened over time. So this chart's going to show us the monthly number of brand new restaurant openings and the monthly number of permanent restaurant closures each month going back a few years. And you can start seeing that green line. Those are brand new restaurants opening their doors for the very first time. That reddish line is restaurants that ultimately closed and did not reopen. And if we look at the period prior to March 2020, which is that date right here, that green line was always above that red line, at least for that year and a half period prior to it, which means that month over month over month, month over month, you had more restaurants opening than you had restaurants closing, so the industry was sort of expanding from a unit count perspective. Make sense? And then you had a pretty long period, probably longer than any of us would have really expected, where that red line sat above the green line. So in every single month from March 2020 all the way through mid to the later part of 2022, you had more closures than you did openings. We finally had a crossover event late last year, and we now seem to be in a little bit of a place of stasis where sometimes the green line's higher, sometimes the red line's higher. But it looks to us like we're going to start seeing a real acceleration of that green line, brand new restaurant openings. And if we look at, well, let's first look at what this meant. Over the last 2.5 years, if you sort of compare where we've been, we lost about 25,000 restaurant locations nationwide. But what we're starting to see now is more and more restaurant openings start to tick up in some other data that we look at, new business filings and whatnot. And I think there's a really great article that NRN just published, I think maybe just last week, showing exploding demand for restaurant real estate, which certainly agrees with our perspective as well. And we think, like, what does this actually mean, right? So what does it mean when you have restaurants open versus restaurants that close? Well, you think about the restaurants that sort of opened up in the wake of the pandemic. Those are probably a lot of places that were sort of pre-planned, and then they sort of like slowed down. They couldn't open for a while, then they opened. Now we're seeing new restaurants open up that are a bit more, I think, inventive in what they do and the types of food that they serve. Right, so I think you'll see hopefully a really nice wave of culinary creativity in this next generation of restaurants. And for all the brands here, maybe you represent some of those, but you're also competing with a lot of those. And one of the messages that I wanted to get across today is we want to really, really dive into that word that is the name of this conference, which is to create. Creativity is what's going to drive this industry forward, certainly. Now, there are some things that we cannot ignore, which is what is the impact of the economy, the consumers, the economic state of consumers. I'm getting this weird echoey type of thing. Is that coming across where you are, or is that just me? I'm good? All right, fantastic. Okay, so let's see. What happens if consumers say, yeah, inflation's sort of high, my dollar's not going quite as far as anymore, maybe my increase in pay does not match my increase in costs, and I have to tighten my budget. Where have consumers started to tighten back, and where do they say they're likely to sort of cut back in spending? So think about all the different things you could spend money on. What sits number one on the list with consumers in terms of where they have cut back or plan to cut back? Is this industry right here. You can see that list. So you got everything from clothes, shopping, travel, entertainment, gas. I guess you get housing. You definitely can't cut back on housing. That's something you definitely need. But restaurant meals are sitting at the top. Note that people don't cut back on alcohol very much, which is a really interesting commentary on society as well. But we know, over the years that discretionary income correlates highly with people getting food outside the home. So who knows for sure what's exactly going to happen with the economy? Probably nobody does, but we should realize there is some, let's say, sensitivity that consumers have toward their spending as it relates to restaurants in particular, and we are particularly reliant on what happens economically. So we can actually track some of this in our data. So we track month over month whether consumers say they plan to dine out more often or less often in the period ahead, and we can sort of see what this number looks like historically. The people that say they're going to, they plan on dining out more often, that's in green, and the people that say they're going to plan on dining out less often, that's in yellow. And you can see that we've had some interesting sort of ebbs and flows, and it really is, there's some short-term changes. It's not like a thing where, everyone's mindset changes and that mindset persists for years and years. Like month to month, people become more optimistic or less optimistic. Now, I think we've seen this period sort of in the earlier parts of this year and certainly the latter parts of last year, where you had a lot more people saying, 40% of people saying, I plan on dining out a little bit less. That has subsided now, and I think we have some level of, at least for now, stasis as well, that we should probably feel pretty good about. A lot of the uncertainty in consumers' minds around the economy at least is sort of like settled a little bit, and it's not quite as chaotic as it was. And I think that gives us a decent base to build off of. So that's where things are from just a general mindset around the economy perspective. But what does that mean as it relates to, let's say, inflation overall? So here's a question for you. Well, let's actually look at a couple of lines first. So this is the Consumer Price Index for food at home, right? So this is trailing 12 months. What has been the past 1 year inflation rate for food at home going back to the early 2000s? That's in blue. This line in pink is away from home food. What do you notice about this chart? Like, if you were an AI and I say, please summarize the top 3 things you see in this chart, what would you report back to me? It's not as volatile, yeah. Number one, that pink line doesn't have the same peaks and valleys that the blue line does. The prices in the grocery store change a lot faster than the prices on restaurant menus. The other thing you might notice is that pink line never goes below 0, where you could actually see maybe net deflation in prices at the grocery store in some periods. You will never see that at restaurants. I can't remember the last time a restaurant reprinted their menu to make their prices lower. I don't think that happens very often. The other thing that you might notice too, though, is if you look at the most recent period, let's say like 2023, and we had that crazy inflationary spike for the cost of food at home, that blue line just going up like crazy, and you look at the pink line, if you sort of average those things out over the last year and a half or so, going back to maybe like November of 2021, which is when things really started to take off, as of today, and it's not massive difference. Well, let me ask you this: do you think that compared to let's say a year and a half ago, has restaurant food gotten more or less expensive compared to food at home? What's your instinct? You think restaurant food's gotten more expensive compared to the changes in price for food at home? Is that right? No. Think less. So those that think less would be right. Since the start of the inflation surge, restaurant food has actually gotten a little bit relative cheaper compared to food at home. And that gap will probably close because what we saw early on when inflation started taking off is restaurants did not raise their menu prices nearly as much. And they were, a lot of operators were just sort of eating it, Their margins were getting crushed. The chain industry actually started taking price increases on menus before most independents did. But I think there's still a lot of catch-up that needs to happen. So if you're really freaked out about hey, are my prices too high? Just know that you probably still actually have a little bit of a comparative price advantage versus food at home compared to where you were 18, 19 months ago. And that's where things are. So, okay. What does this mean for menu pricing? I want to talk about an aspect of menu pricing and some things that we found that have been, pretty common sense and where we see menu pricing makes all sorts of sense, and some places where we say, whoa, that's sort of crazy. Why is that happening with menu pricing, and is there something we can do to address it? So I'm going to show you some cases where menu pricing across chain locations can actually be pretty inefficient. But before we see that, I want to show you just what's happening with menu pricing overall. So here we have our beloved Big Mac. Who here wants to volunteer a guess as to what the average cost of a Big Mac is across the country? Sandwich only, not a combo meal, no drinks, no fries. What is the average cost of a Big Mac? And this is not a trick question. It's not like a crazy high price, nor is it a crazy low price. Who here goes to McDonald's enough in enough locations that you can actually take a mental average? All right, so this is how we'll do this. So, all right. I feel like the ghost of Bob Barker or something. What price? Should I say Drew Carey instead? Okay. Is it above $3? Yes. Is it above $4? Yes. Is it above $5? Yes. All right, let's try it. Is it above $4.50? I think more people said yes. Is it above $5? Yes. I think that was that mostly yeses? Is it above $5.50? Yes. I think that's our like 50-50 point. I heard like equal number of no's and yeses. So the actual number is $5.26. Why are you disappointed? Like, what makes you sad about this? All right, and what's the least expensive Big Mac in the US? Well, let's look at our lows. That's $3.49. And our high? Sandwich only, no drinks, no fries. Well, the ooze and the like shock of the $8.29 is coming through. So we're going to talk about some parts of the country today, many of which I haven't had the personal pleasure of visiting just yet. So I'm going to look for your personal commentary as to why the 3 most expensive Big Macs in the entire country are all in Connecticut. Can anyone tell me? I actually don't. This is not a rhetorical thing. Can anyone tell me why? Does anyone know these areas? Is this like a super fancy part of Connecticut that's just? Yeah. Okay. So that's it. So, not the best deal on a Big Mac if you're looking for a Big Mac deal. But you can see there's a pretty broad range of pricing. The most expensive Big Mac is more than double the cost of the least expensive Big Mac for the exact same thing. So where are menu prices the highest across the entire US? Are there certain like zip codes or areas or cities that are particularly expensive? Well, let's see. Number 1 is the 10036 zip code. Anyone know where this is? Manhattan, and specifically I think it covers Times Square. And you can see from our data, and I'll tell you how we know this actually. We now collect on a monthly basis the menu pricing for every single item at every single location of many of the top chains. So across the 14,000 or so McDonald's, we know the price of every Big Mac, every fries, everything on their menu, et cetera, and for many other chains as well. So we could look at a location level, reaggregate by zip, by city, by block, you name it, and see how expensive or cheap, relatively speaking, places are. So if you're in the 10036, you're paying 24% more on average for whatever you're buying there from a restaurant compared to someone in the quote-unquote average part of the US. I'm not sure if it's too small, the fonts for you to read in the back there, but I'll just read off some of the things that we see in some of the most expensive zip codes across the country. A lot of it's New York City, but you see a lot of Hawaii in there, which certainly makes sense. Alaska, San Diego's on there. And then, I don't know what, Yakima is on there. Am I even pronouncing that right? Any reason why that's expensive? Again, not rhetorical, I'm just genuinely curious. It's all what? So why would that be? It's hard to get stuff there? It's like a mini Alaska or Hawaii in the middle of Washington? Ma- So, again, probably not the best place to get a good deal on chain restaurant food, but you can see, these are substantial premiums over other parts of the country, and this is the average for the entire zip code. How about the 78526 zip code, which is actually the least expensive place to get food in the country? And this is Brownsville, Texas, where you're paying about 9% less than you are elsewhere. I was sort of surprised to see, despite all the people moving to Texas, there's still a lot of really affordable chain restaurant food in Texas. Texas sort of dominates this list. Some places in Louisiana there, some places in Georgia, North Carolina, a lot of stuff in the South. But again, pretty big swings in terms of what you can expect to pay if you're a consumer. Now, let's take a look at this chart here. I'm probably going to have to describe this a bit. We have two axes. The first axis is menu premium, how much more or less something costs on the menu. The second axis is the cost of living, right? So not just for food, for like all things in life as the government deems, worthy in its cost of living calculation. And we could look at different states across the country, right? So I don't know if you can see all the individual letters, but each dot is a state, and we sort of color-coded them for things that are like really expensive in the upper right to places that are, relatively cheap in the lower left. And if you can sort of see that line that goes across, there's sort of a straight line relationship, right? As the cost of living goes up, that generally correlates with a higher menu premium that you expect at restaurants too. That makes sense. And what that sort of tells us is, for the most part, restaurants are pricing their menu generally in line with just higher or lower cost of living, at least on a state basis. When you get into like smaller areas, it gets a little wacky, and we'll talk about that in a moment. And you see some things that depart a little bit, right? So like the cost of living is not super high in Alaska, but the menu costs are super high, right? There's an outlier, Alaska all the way to the right. Or DC and Massachusetts for some reason, the menu costs aren't that high, but the cost of living is really high. But other than that, things are mostly on that straight line up and to the right. If you look at the correlation between cost of living and menu premium, it's a 0.81, which statistically just means that 80% of menu premium can be predicted by the cost of living or vice versa. They correlate pretty darn well together. So that seems to sort of make sense intuitively, right? Cost of living is high, menu is going to be expensive. But things are really, really way less sensible when you look at the actual individual unit level. So this is some of the interesting stuff we can do with our data, where we can look at the price of every single item at every single restaurant within our top chain universe at each individual location. What we've sort of done is we've created a color-coded map of relative expensiveness and relative cheapness. Each one of these little dots that you see is a different chain restaurant location. And if it's green, it means that it is a particularly cheap location for that chain based on what it charges on its menu. If it's red, it means it's a particularly expensive location of that chain on that particular menu. And what you start seeing as you sort of drill in is you have like green dots like right next to red dots. You have an expensive McDonald's literally across the street from a cheap Burger King or something, which doesn't make any sense. But I got you to understand, like, hey, you're in Alaska, everything's going to be expensive. You're in Hawaii, everything's going to be expensive. But why would you have a cheap restaurant right next to an expensive restaurant literally across the block from each other? There's a lot of pricing inefficiency. So it might be some of this is like, franchisees gone wild or some variation of that. But we have not learned how to price our menus perfectly efficiently just yet, right? Obviously, like in Manhattan, there's going to be a lot of red, but when you go a little bit further out, you see reds parked right next to greens for no apparent reason at all. So I think we have a lot of things that we could still do to make our menu pricing much more efficient than it is right now. In a broad way, at like a state level, maybe even at like a giant city level, menu prices sort of make sense, but unit to unit, there is a lot of inefficiency and craziness that still need to be smoothed out. Now, there are some areas, actually there's one area of the country where literally everything is red. Like everything's expensive. You won't find a cheap restaurant, and you just go over here. And there it is. Yeah, good luck finding a green place to eat in Hawaii. So that's what pricing sort of looks like. I hope we can get a little bit smarter about how we price things at individual stores. And again, some of it is franchisee based, but it's not always the case because we could actually split our units out by company owned versus franchisee owned, and you see inefficiency on both sides still. So store pricing often just doesn't make sense. Let's figure out that a little bit better with better data. So from a consumer perspective, I'm going to show you something. This data is something that I've shown in the past, but I think it's very instructive for us all to understand, which is what do consumers think about eating at restaurants, which includes takeout and fast food as well as sitting down. It includes delivery, all the away from home stuff on one side, versus food at home. So for each one of these, using your voice to vote, you can say restaurants or home. Where do you think consumers fall on this axis? So when it comes to being more affordable, what do you think consumers say is more affordable? Yeah, by a pretty broad margin, right? It's not really remotely close. Healthier. Not a single person said restaurants? So it's a little sad, and we're gonna talk about that later on and see if we can fix that a little bit. Yeah, like even more so, 89 to 11. How about convenience? And again, these, no one said home, right? So this will disappoint you a little bit. It's, one thing that we've seen, and this actually started prior to the pandemic. The pandemic obviously made things, much more intense, and now we have all the ongoing ripple effects of that, is people were staying at home more. We spent more time indoors. Even pre-pandemic, I think we spent something like 93% of our day indoors. We weren't going out, we weren't getting sunlight. It's actually sort of like terrible for your mental well-being. Certainly, then all of a sudden we got locked into our houses, and then people started working from home. And most eating decisions, when you first say like, hey, I'm hungry, I gotta get something to eat, that almost always originates in the home. Not always, but like 80% of the time. And we're in our homes more than we ever have been before, which is why it's great that we're all here right now. But a lot of people are just home a lot more. So for them, convenience is getting food where they already are. So it's about a toss-up on convenience. How about craveability? I'm glad he said that. Were you getting scared to vote restaurant? Like, hey, yeah, so restaurants have a real advantage over here. And I'll tell you something that I think is one of the great stats for this industry, is that the typical American consumer is more excited for leftover restaurant food than they are for the majority of the food that they get from home. So we win on craveability in a big way. And how about just enjoyability? Yeah, and restaurants have an advantage there as well. So you sort of look at how all these things stack up together. And I think my message is, yes, we can work on all of these, but we really want to make sure that we lean into our strengths, craveability and enjoyability and that overall, fantastic guest experience. That's the stuff that ultimately separates restaurants from food at home. That's the thing that you can't get from home. This includes foods you couldn't normally get from home, you don't know how to make at home. But as it relates to, let's say, that experience, that enjoyability, as a ripple effect of the pandemic, when a lot of restaurants had to rehire a bunch of people, you lost your worker that had been there for 10 years and they got replaced by someone that hasn't even worked for 10 years and certainly doesn't know the system quite yet. We started seeing wide reporting, including in our own data, that consumers were saying, yeah, I don't think the experience is quite as good as I remember it being pre-pandemic. And you can see the numbers pretty clearly over here. So, hey, Mr. Consumer, Miss Consumer, is restaurant service better today in limited service restaurants, LSR? Is there no change? Or was it better pre-COVID? And you have, more people saying that restaurant service in limited service restaurants was better pre-COVID. How about for full service restaurants? It's like basically the same numbers, right? In both cases, consumers are saying, yeah, it's not quite as good as I remember. Now, I think that gap is starting to shrink as the workers in those locations are like getting more accustomed to things and have a little bit more experience there. But we should know that this is a condition that has persisted for a while and is not yet fully rectified. Another way of thinking about what's happening in restaurants is just like how active are restaurants and chains in particular in introducing new things to the consumer, bringing new items on the menu, whether it's a permanent new menu item or an LTO of some sort of seasonal item. How active is the restaurant industry? So we look at just the largest, couple hundred chains, month over month, this yellow line represents how many new menu introductions were brought onto those menus in that particular month. And we'll go back to 2016 and take it all the way through to last month in this chart. That red line represents the period of immediately following COVID, where we had a huge drop, right? Everyone suspended doing anything, right, as we all know. And the thing that amazes me is it didn't take very long for activity to resume, right? We got that red line right back up to where that yellow line had historically been in just a few months, right? So the industry did the right thing and it continued to be quite active in bringing new things onto the menu, which frankly was probably super important for the industry's success. That's really good. However, and there is a however to this, we can also look at some other data. We have a system that we call Scores, which many of you may already use, that tracks every new item that's sort of debuting at a chain restaurant, as well as what consumers think of those items. And some of the things that we look at when we ask, well, what do consumers think of this new thing that debuted, are a few metrics. So we can look at this loaded guac smashed burger at Ruby Tuesday as an example. This is one of the 50,000, I think, new menu introductions that we've tracked over the last few years. And there are some measures at the bottom, right? So you have this thing called unbranded PI, unbranded purchase intent. Hey, how likely are you to order this item just based on the name of the item and its description and its photo? The branded purchase intent, that next line, is knowing it's from Ruby Tuesday, what does that do to your level of interest? Then you have uniqueness. Does this seem like it's something like new and different to you? And then a few other measures, would you eat this all the time? Would you make a special trip just to buy this, just to get this dish? Do you think it's a good value for, considering the price point that it's offered at? But I want to focus on the notion of purchase interest, purchase intent, and uniqueness for a moment, and see what's happened with that over the past few years. So this green line is the average purchase intent for the hundreds of items every single month that debut at chain restaurants. And the pink line is the average level of perceived uniqueness by consumers for those same items month over month over month. And the nice thing is the industry's done a pretty good job of building purchase intent over time, right? Like the green line is like sort of going up and to the right, which is what you'd like to see, right? We're sort of improving, getting better at, using data and honing our knowledge of trends to offer up things that consumers actually want to order. And the pink line had been increasing over time as well, right? For quite some time. Looks like, from 2017 to 2021, we really got good at offering things that were not only like appealing to consumers in terms of purchase interest, but they also thought we're getting more and more unique. But since COVID, I don't know if you can see that shaded area on the right. Can you make that? Yeah, you can make that out. We've seen a bit of a decline in that pink line, right? So to some extent, and this is probably pretty understandable from a chain's perspective, there's maybe been a little bit of playing it safe on the menu to not bring in the really like new, interesting flavor or dish or flavor combination in favor of something that felt like it'd be more of like a surefire, mainstream hit with the audience. And that probably works okay sort of in the short run, but I think it's sort of fatal in the long run if we don't turn that pink line around, because we will lose one of the key reasons why people want to get food from restaurants in the first place, which is to try something new. 65% of the time when someone tries something new for the first time that they put in their mouth, I'm talking just food and beverage, not other objects, 65% of the time, it was something they got at a restaurant, as opposed to something they got from the grocery store or made at home. So restaurants are where people try new things. And I think we want to turn that pink line up and around so it starts going back up and to the right. So I'd encourage all of us to get a little more creative in the things that we bring to the menu. It's okay to take those risks. In fact, I think it's greater risk to not take those risks on the menu in the long run. We need that creativity. So you could look at some of these, words going by on your screen. These are words that we track in our data set that are becoming more popular, flavors that are becoming more popular with consumers over time. We track several thousand foods, flavors, ingredients, and we ask consumers continuously, do you know what this is? Have you tried it before? Do you love it? Do you hate it? And you just saw a very small smattering of things that, I don't know, didn't they sort of feel like these are like trendy things as they went by? Like, oh yeah, that's sort of trendy. I'll expect to see that featured at, in one of the meals outside. It's something that's quite cool, right? And we can actually see over time which of those are growing in familiarity with consumers, right? The number of consumers that are aware of or have tried those types of foods or flavors. And then we can actually look at that same data and go all the way down to individual zip codes or cities or states or what have you and say, well, which parts of the country are people most familiar with these new hot trendy foods and flavors? Does that make sense? So if I were to say like, hey, think about like big US metros, Dallas would be a big US metro. What do you think would make that list of top metros where the people who live there are most familiar with like newer food trends? Here, LA, Atlanta, New York, Boston, San Francisco. Did someone? Oh, you said Oakland. Okay, I thought you said about Oklahoma. Like I don't know about that one, but what else? DC, Chicago. Okay, we've named the entire country at this point. Why don't we just take a look? So number one out of all the US metros is in fact San Francisco, right? Applaud for yourself, give yourself a pat on the back, whatever makes you feel happy and good about yourself, be my guest. But San Francisco is the place where the people who live there are most familiar with these things that look like they're hot food trends. And this will probably be true for a long period of time. Number two is sort of hard to get because it's almost like an extension in a way of San Francisco. It's Monterey. You have a very high level of food trend familiarity with the people that live there. Number three on the list is Miami. And you'll actually find something interesting. There is a direct correlation with the population of, let's say, diverse people and the population of ethnic restaurants. And there's also a correlation between the population of ethnic restaurants with how familiar the general population that live in that city are with newer food trends as well. So there's sort of a double dynamic going on over there. Those are the top three, and you can sort of see, I think we did maybe the top 10 over here, and see if the cities or metro areas that you expected to be on this list did in fact make that list. I checked right before I got on the stage this morning where Palm Springs sits in the list. It's inside the top 20, which actually isn't that bad. So that's actually quite good given there's nearly 200 metros across the US. Anything you think should have made it here that didn't? I hear Chicago. New York's on here. Boston didn't quite make it, but I think it was in that very, very next tier. So these are the top, right? These are the top 10 US metros where people are most familiar with trendy foods. And if there is a place where people are most familiar with trendy foods, by definition, there must be places where people are least familiar. Maybe. So let us see where these places are, and this will actually make it even funnier, I think. So coming in at number 156 on our list of US metros, and so I will say I've been to many US cities. I've not been to any of these three that I'm about to show you. And I think this is where like audience participation really comes in. So if anyone has any personal experience with any of these three and can share with the rest of us what the food is like over there, and either confirm or refute these rankings, I actually would love that. So does anyone been to Beaumont or live in Beaumont? Yeah. Texas. Tell us, you're from Beaumont. So what's the food like over there? Okay, it's amazing. All right. So we'll consider that refutation number one. At number 157, a little bit lower on the list in Beaumont, is Evansville. And crap, I can't even remember what state this is anymore. Is this Indiana? Anyone from Evansville or been to Evansville? Not great. So we have one refute, one confirm. And our all-time favorite, we heard it here earlier, 158, absolute bottom of the list, is lovely Wausau, Wisconsin. And we've tried many ways of ranking the least and most sort of food-forward cities in the US, whether it's based on what consumers know, which is what we just looked at. We've done it based on what's on the menu. We've looked at how diverse the restaurant scene is in each one of the cities. And no matter what metric we use, and we've tried 7 or 8 of them, Wausau is dead last in every single measure. I'll tell you something amazing about Wausau. I don't have a slide for this, but this is remarkable. In most cities, if you take, let's say, to get to like 65% of the restaurants in most cities, you probably need like 10 or 11 or even 12 different cuisine types. You got like some burger places, some pizza places, some Chinese restaurants, some Japanese, some Thai food. You get to 65% of the restaurants in Wausau just with 3 cuisine types. And those cuisine types are bar and grill, pub, and varied menu, which is basically like all 3 of the same cuisines. So it's not the most diverse food place. Anyone from Wausau and care to defend your town? You won't be shamed, I promise. I do say, I mean, look, it's great that we're in a city for this event that is pretty food progressive. And I hear all the time people say, yeah, you know, I come from this place and we used to not have a great food scene, but you know, now it's getting so much better. We've really turned into a foodie town. I think that's like totally bullshit because places like Wausau are just absolutely not true of that whatsoever. You want to do a food tour of dine around in all the new restaurants, pick someplace else, and we will move on from there. Okay, we have some really important stuff that we're going to get to next. How are we looking on time, by the way? 10 minutes? Okay, you're going to take 30 seconds right now. Every single person in this room is going to take their phone out and visit this link. You're going to get a package with a whole bunch of food trends. Of course, you get this presentation as well. You get 3 other reports on everything you possibly want to know about the world of restaurants and food and what consumers are thinking today. It's stuff that could not make it into this 45-minute talk. So please go there right now. I'll give you another 20 seconds. It only takes about 20 seconds to punch in your info, and then we will continue. The next thing that we're going to talk about when we get started is, so one of the things that we got sort of asked is, how do we give everyone here a bit of a challenge, something to sort of take home, sort of as like long-term homework, if you will, something to like think about, something to work on, you know, something that goes beyond just like, oh, I learned something interesting, but something like really, really see if you could do something about in your own operations. And I want to get at that. And maybe the best way of doing that is to start by playing a little bit of a game and see who can tell me what this chart is. This one's not that easy. So you can see we have 2 axes. We have what looks like dates probably, you know, like starting from 1900 to 2020 in the x-axis, and in the y-axis we have numbers going from 30 to 80. And I'm going to just plot this line. Who wants to venture a guess as to what it is that we're looking at here? I heard population. I think I heard something else. What else did I hear? Oh God, I can't. Lifespan? Did someone say lifespan? Yeah, so that's actually exactly what this is. This is US life expectancy at birth. So that's excellent, by the way. Yeah, that's excellent. And this is US life expectancy at birth since 1900. You can see we started off somewhere in the 40s, and now we're up somewhere in the 70s, which is pretty impressive progress. But you want to look at the rate of change in this progress during that time. So we sort of subdivided this chart into 20-year increments. And you can see in the first 20 years, we gained about 5 years of life. From 1920 to 1940, we did really good. We gained 7 years of life. And you can see the 1919 pandemic very clearly in that chart too, right? From 1920 to 1940, we gained about 7 years of life, about 6 years of life in the subsequent 20 years, and then 3 years, and then 3.5 years, and then 2 years. It gets lower and lower. And even pre-COVID, we saw not just a flattening, but an actual decline in US life expectancy. Right? Like, it's sort of an important thing, right? We all want to live a long time, hopefully, if we can. So the rate of increase has dropped dramatically, and we may even be in a prolonged period of decline. I guess only time will tell. So I did what any semi-lazy researcher would do, and I asked ChatGPT to tell us why this is happening. And here's the exact prompt that we used. We said, hey, based on all available data, what would you rank as the top 10 reasons that life expectancy gains have slowed down and may even be declining in the US over the past few decades? Please present a bulleted ranked list of the most likely causes, including a score from 0 to 10 to denote the impact of each factor. And don't blame me, this is what ChatGPT came up with. So you can see I don't know if you can read that all in the back there. And look, this is AI, it's not perfect, it's interpretation, but this probably feels pretty intuitively true to most of us, I would expect. Opioid epidemic, #1 at a 9.0, and you can see the rest, and sitting there right behind opioids at #2 is an unhealthy American diet with a contributory score of 8.5, right? And then obesity was, right next to that, which you could argue is related, substance abuse, et cetera. But unhealthy American diet, pretty high up on that list from a pretty smart chatbot. So we want to dig into this a little bit deeper and just look at maybe some public data as to what's actually going on. Who knows what this stands for, NAFLD? Is that a familiar term to many? So it stands for non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. And to maybe have an understanding what this is a healthy, fully functioning liver. This is a fatty liver. It looks sort of different. And I sort of was worried. I'm like, this slide's not labeled. Someone's going to copy this deck. They're going to think this is like a food trend or something. That probably isn't great. But the liver on the right looks pretty starkly different than the liver on the left. And once you go past that, then you get into cirrhosis and necrosis. Is really, really, really bad. You don't want to have a fatty liver. It's horrible. So the question is, what does the incidence of fatty liver disease look like? Back in the 50s, the estimates, and again, these are just, estimates. No one knows for sure. There's, different studies, but they all seem to point in the very similar direction. Like probably about 5% of the US population. Any guesses as to what the number might be? Yeah, we have really pessimistic people in this room, but pretty accurate people in this room as well. That is a profound increase. Now remember, you can't go above 100%. We're like basically halfway there already. We could look at diabetes in this country, right? Half the country now is diabetic or pre-diabetic at this point. What we call type 2 diabetes used to be called, adult onset diabetes, but we don't call that anymore because we're seeing it in kids now as well. And something interesting happens when people go out to a restaurant to get something to eat, right? So a lot of times we say to ourselves, yeah, I'm gonna get something to eat, and I'm gonna get something healthy. Like I'm leaving the door. I'm going to the restaurant with the express intent of getting something healthy for myself. But what we see in our data when we ask consumers, hey, did you leave the door yesterday with the intent of ordering something healthy? Of the people that said yes, 60% said, I aborted that mission somewhere along the way between my door and my plate. Maybe an amazing looking dish came by and it just changed my mind, or I saw something else on the menu. But that's a pretty big thing. Like 60% of people can't commit to an idea for 30 minutes, right? because we've done such a great job of making food taste so good and look so appealing that they're not doing the thing they really want to do. So let me ask you all this. Think of all the things that could matter to you in life, like your family, your finances, your relationships with others, travel, seeing the world. Raise your hand if you would put your own personal health in that top 5 things that might be most important to you. Right? Probably many of us. How many would put eating tasty food in that top 5 list? Not quite the ratio I was expecting, but this is a non-representative audience. But I think a lot more people think like, hey, having some level of personal health is more important to me than just having something that tastes really good, even in this audience where we really care about stuff that tastes good. And we see that gap quite profoundly in the general consumer population, right? People say, I really want to be healthy, but boy, I keep breaking that promise to myself. And to us, that really looks like the ultimate unmet consumer need, right? Is to be able to eat and have something that's satiating and is great, but more importantly, service that underlying need to have some level of optimized personal health. And if we look at why people say they don't eat healthy when they go out away from home, the number one reason is like, hey, when I go out, it's supposed to be indulgent, so that's fine. That's the intent. The number 2 reason is that there just aren't enough healthy options available. There is a big opportunity to sort of fix this in a way and make some real money in the process of doing it. There is a lot of demand for healthier options. Now, of course, the word healthy means different things to different people, but overall, people think there just still aren't enough healthy options available. So we work on a really great piece of research with NRN and looking at the top 500 restaurant chains across the U.S. And as part of that, we also publish a much more detailed report that tells you everything you want to know about chains, right? What's happening with labor and inflation, with employees and the unionization efforts, with economic concerns of consumers, what's happened to price increases on menus, the fact that restaurants have reduced their operating hours, drive-through only locations, restaurants going to the metaverse, pretty much everything you want to know. And we also look at financial projections as part of this. And in those financial projections, we can sort of break out the different types of chain restaurants there are and see which ones have grown the most in sales. And the type of restaurant that has grown the most in the chain restaurant in terms of sales, by far, are sort of health-focused restaurants. We have strong empirical evidence that consumers are voting with their pocketbooks for something that's healthier. And there's a lot of these concepts that are popping up or continuing to grow that are doing absolutely great. They will continue to grow. You ask why that LSR healthful segment or some of the full-service healthy restaurants are growing so quickly. It's because of concepts like these and many, many others. And we think it's only going to continue to go. And look, this message is not for everybody. There's some brands where healthy just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Here's the menu from the Heart Attack Grill in Las Vegas. I think it's pretty funny. Like, you actually eat free if you pass a certain weight requirement. And the bottom, it says cash only, plus an 8.36% tax for our wasteful, pathetic, illegitimate government to squander. So they have their own political views. Then I look at this. Is it just, you guys would know better than I do because I'm not in supply chain, but is it just me or is this seems like a really good price for bacon? Like 40 slices for $7 is amazing, isn't it? That's pretty good. But back to the more important thing. So, we think that the demand for healthy options is by definition going to have to continue to increase. I wear one of these things. I don't know if you can see this on my underside of my arm over here. It's a continuous glucose monitor where I can actually just it's sort of biohacky-ish. I can look at what happens to my blood sugar minute to minute. Here's my day the other day. You can see I had delicious sushi. So no, I had Chinatown, New York City Chinatown dumplings the other day, and it immediately caused that big spike. You see where the green line goes red? That's a spike in my blood sugar in an instant reaction to it. These types of tracking technologies are going to become more and more common, right? You can start already to track your heart rate and some basic things. You can even track atrial fibrillation in something like an Apple Watch. The next generation of these might have continuous blood pressure monitoring, cortisol measurement, glucose monitoring, other things that will constantly remind us of our own health. And you know the saying, right? We manage to what we measure. So if we put all these measurements in front of us at all times, we're going to be thinking about this stuff more and more and more. I think more and more people are going to act on that. I got to do something that's healthy because I want to be healthy, and I'm being constantly reminded of it on all of my devices, which is why I'd say take home as your homework today. What can we do to make healthy stuff more enticing? And I would say everything other than that very top reason that people don't eat healthy, which is they just want indulgent stuff when they eat at a restaurant, everything underneath that is stuff we could work on, right? Making healthy options more affordable, making more available in the first place, making it more fun, having information available to consumers. These are all things that we can do, and I think we make a lot of money in the process doing it. So I think all of our interests align if we're willing to tackle this one thing. So that would be my parting message. Let's see if we could focus on that ultimate unmet consumer need. With that, I'll keep this link here. If you didn't get a chance to go there right now, or you will forever lose your opportunity. You'll be regretting it. So do that now. And Alicia has some really important messages for us right before we go to break. Thanks, everybody.